Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our panel presentation on the Lincoln Park Superfund site. My name is Lisa Stutz, the Museum Director for the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center. As some of you may know, our museum is the local repository of the Cotter collection. We have multiple reports, a whole vault full of records and studies done by and about the Cotter Corporation and the Lincoln Park Superfund site. It is our responsibility at the museum to ensure these records are preserved and made accessible to everyone. We encourage all of you to explore these reports and become informed on this topic. We understand this collection, and especially this topic, can be rather intimidating and at times generate strong emotions. Our goal, as with everything staff does here at the museum, is to help the public better understand our community by teaching about our collective history, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. We believe at the end of the day, our community benefits from its citizens learning and understanding all the different aspects of its collective past. It is what helps us all be in the best position for moving this community forward into the future. It is now 40 years since Cotter was designated a Superfund site by the Environmental Protection Agency. To help us all tell this site's history, we have called upon some experts to talk about what led up to it becoming a Superfund site, the impact the site has had on the community, the formation and history of local citizens groups helping to inform the public about the site, its recent past, and what is currently happening with the site. On our panel is Emily Tracy, who is the chair of the Community Advisory Group for the Lincoln Park Cotter Superfund site in Canyon City. She has been involved with the Superfund site off and on as a Canyon City resident since the late 1970s. Emily has a bachelor's degree in humanities and a master's degree in public administration with an emphasis in environmental management. She served for 8 years as an elected city council member in Canyon City in the 1980s and the early 1990s, and was elected again to a 4-year term in November 2021. She also serves as an advisor to the Colorado Citizens Against Toxic Waste. Carol Dunn was born in Canyon City and has been a resident of the Lincoln Park area for over 45 years, owning and operating Hilltop Market. Since the mid-1980s, Carol has been involved in community activism. She became a member of the Lincoln Park Concerned Citizens Group and testified at hearings. In 2002, Carol became a director of the Colorado Citizens Against Toxic Waste, or CCAT, and has served as a co-chair since 2006. She brings her knowledge and experience living near the Superfund site. Our next panelist, Jeri Fry, is the founding co-chair of Colorado Citizens Against Toxic Waste and has served as a director on the board for 21 years. She has testified several times at the state legislature and was involved in helping to pass 4 pieces of legislation that reformed uranium processing in Colorado. She currently serves on the CCAT board as the board treasurer and is the chair of the education and grant committees. She also grew up in Lincoln Park, and her father, Lynn Boughton, was the whistleblower at the Colorado uranium processing mill. Our final panelist, Chase Patterson, who is a documentary filmmaker focusing on uncovering the histories behind EPA Superfund sites for a YouTube channel called Keep Curious Company. Recently, he released a documentary titled The Hidden Crisis at Canyon City. It covers the history of the Cotter Lincoln Park Superfund site. Chase was raised in Florida and is now based in Denver. He has an outsider's perspective and has some insight on the corporate structure underlying some of the delays of progress the site is experiencing today. Before I turn it over to our panelists, I want to mention that we are recording this presentation, and we will make this video available to view on our YouTube channel and channel 191, and you can always request a digital copy of the video from our staff. I also ask you to please reserve your questions and/or comments to the end of the presentation, and to please silence your cell phones. Thank you so much. I will now turn it over to Emily.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks to all of you for being here. We appreciate it. I wanted to touch real briefly, in case anyone doesn't know, what a uranium mill is. It's a facility that takes uranium ore and runs it through a crushing and solvent processes to extract the uranium. Then the extracted uranium is dried, and the end product, called yellow cake, is shipped elsewhere for further processing to ultimately be used in fuel rods for nuclear power plants. So that's the kind of facility we had out here. I thought it would be good to just touch briefly on the history of the mill site, and then also, of course, direct you to the display in the back of the room. If you haven't seen that yet, do that later. Very brief history is this. The original uranium mill was established in about 1957, just south of Canyon City. There are multiple reasons why it should never have been located there. There was no nearby uranium mine. It's in a drainage that flows into a major river, the Arkansas. It is uphill and upwind from populated areas, and it's located over extensive coal mine workings and on permeable sandstone. Contamination of the Lincoln Park area was first found in the 1960s and 70s. And there was also a major flood in 1965 that flowed right through the Cotter Mill site down the Sand Creek drainage, bringing contamination into Lincoln Park, down the drainage, and also down South 12th Street. The mill site was primarily regulated through a state radioactive materials license with the Colorado Department of Health, now known as CDPHE, or the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And that regulation by the state was through permission of the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency, or what we refer to as the EPA, became more involved when the site was named a Superfund site in 1984. Of course, as Lisa mentioned, we're celebrating, so to speak, the 40th year as a Superfund site here this year. It's important to note that the mill was never closed down by regulators. It operated off and on over the years depending on the uranium market until about 2011 when the company permanently closed the operation. In 2018, Cotter paid a new company, Colorado Legacy Land, or CLL, to take over the property and the responsibility to manage and clean up the site. 5 years later, in February 2023, CLL declared that they were insolvent and walked away from their regulatory responsibilities. CLL, by the way, still owns the property. The EPA has brought Cotter Corporation back to the site as a responsible party under federal law, and the CDPHE, the health department, has been contracting with a company named Encero to conduct site monitoring, maintenance, and security. A request for proposals was issued recently by the state, and a decision will be made in April regarding whether Encero will continue as the state's contractor or whether the contract will be awarded to a different company. I'm going to provide a look at what was going on in the late 70s and early 80s to see some differences but many similarities to issues today. It was a time of much activity and controversy regarding the Cotter site. And just to briefly provide a little context for those times, late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot going on around the country related to nuclear power. We had, in March of '79, the partial meltdown of a core at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. We also had uranium mining and milling in New Mexico, often on Indian lands, and there was a tailings dam, a uranium tailings dam failure that spilled radioactive materials over a 60-acre area in New Mexico. And at this same time frame, we also had the state health department investigating the use of uranium tailings in Mesa County, Colorado, Grand Junction, because tailings had been used there as fill when housing was constructed. And it was reported that residents there had the highest lung cancer and leukemia incidence in the state. The Hansen Project, or Amoco Cypress Project, in the Tallahassee area of Fremont County, just northwest of here, a major open pit uranium mine had been approved by the state and by Fremont County, but the company announced in September of 1980 that it was shutting down. And here is a headline from that point in time. And as many of you know in the audience, that is now something that's back in the news as test drilling continues there. There was no internet then, no email, no social media, no electronic documents, but there were multiple activist groups in Canyon City, and they were effective in getting the attention of authorities and ensuring that public meetings were well attended. At times we had 100 or more community members attending public meetings and public hearings regarding the Cotter Mill site. I moved to Canyon City in 1977, and the first public meeting I attended regarding problems at the mill was in 78 or 79. I was 32 in 1979, a full-time mother to 8 and 5-year-olds. They are now in their 50s. There was a lot going on from the late 70s into the early 80s. I will highlight several of these issues and events using documents and news clippings from my own files. In many instances, you will see that issues identified more than 40 years ago are still not fully addressed by regulators. Cotter at that time, in the late 70s, was working to open a new mill at the site, an acid leach process instead of alkali leach. There were many objections from the community to this happening. Also at the same time was when they were building the new lined primary and secondary impoundments. And it just so happens that doing that was in violation of standards, federal standards for siting uranium milling facilities and impoundment facilities. So even at that time, they were not in compliance, even though it was allowed to happen. They were not in compliance with federal standards about where to put facilities like that. Also in this time frame, there was a proposed housing project just west and northwest of the Cotter site called Oro Verde, now the Wolf Park and Dawson areas. Some local authorities, plus the EPA, were concerned about a residential area so close to mill operations. Even Cotter noted their concerns at the time. In February 1980, regulators ordered air sampling in the Oro Verde area, and I think that's continued to this day. Just a couple of headlines from then. One article, housing project near mill under criticism, and there's a quote in here from an EPA professional expressing his concerns about housing being allowed so close to the site. And then here's a headline showing that the state ordered sampling to be done in that area. So it's, again, some of these things go back much farther than what we realize unless we start looking at some of the old documents. There were a lot of headlines in 1980, particularly mid to late 1980. The Colorado Bureau of Investigations, or CBI, our state law enforcement investigation agency, issued a report in September 1980 that Cotter had falsified worker exposure records for 10 years and had falsified air monitoring data. Here's a headline from the Pueblo chieftain at that time. And I should mention, we had multiple newspapers covering these things, both locally and in Pueblo, Colorado Springs, the 2 daily newspapers in Denver. So we had a much more robust situation with newspapers back at that time, which really helped us in the communication within the community and also with others in the state and with the regulators. And again, another headline, CBI testimony reflects production over safety. So as a result of the CBI report and state inspections showing license violations, area residents demanded that the mill be cleaned up. Here's a headline to that effect. Residents near uranium mill demand cleanup. Did that ever happen? No. We didn't get a cleanup then. We're still working on trying to get a full cleanup now. In that article that I just held up, I won't take time to read, but there's some reference in there to regulators saying things like, well, we want Cotter to put a tracer in these new impoundments so that eventually we'll know if these new impoundments are leaking like the old impoundments did. And that's another issue that we continue to request 40-some years later. There was never a tracer put in the new impoundments. In response to Lincoln Park residents' requests, the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission did step in October 1980 and made recommendations to the State Health Department regarding their licensing and monitoring procedures, which the NRC found to be lax. Here's a headline from that time: NRC to review state's procedures with Cotter. So they met with Cotter, they met with the State Health Department, they made some recommendations, and interestingly, we're at a point now where we may ask the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission to come back in again 40-some years later and take a look at the regulatory procedures of the State Health Department. At that time, the Colorado Department of Health agreed to create a citizens committee, which I chaired, to improve communications between the Colorado Department of Health and the community. The State Health Department and Cotter committed to attending the ongoing citizens committee meetings. In December of 1980, the committee requested and received a tour of the mill. At the first meeting of the committee in November of that year, 1980, I circulated photos I had taken of the tailings material blowing off-site. And you'll see in the display, if you haven't looked already, that several of those photos that I took in late 1980 are there part of the display. So I circulated those at our Citizens Committee meeting. I provided those to regulators. And we really never did get an assessment of what was the impact of those blowing tailings. Some of those, and I have notes from the time, in addition to the photos that I took, that reflect that sometimes those tailings, you could see them hundreds of feet in the air blowing, I don't know how far to the east, generally west to east, although we know the wind doesn't always blow west to east here. But we never did get a full assessment of what that impact might have been of that radioactive material blowing east of the site. Over the years, there's been extensive information about the contamination of Lincoln Park groundwater and private wells, plus soils by Cotter operations, the leakage from the old tailings areas and also from the flood in 1965. Though Cotter for years denied being the source of the contamination, they were repeatedly verified as the source by regulators over the years. For example, here's a headline from October of 1980. NRC reports Cotter caused bad wells. And I think even to this day, there are people who continue to say, oh no, it's just natural uranium in the area. Well, no, it was not, and it never was that. Also in the fall of 1980, the State Department of Health threatened to revoke or suspend Cotter's radioactive materials license. Here's a headline from that time: state may pull Cotter permit. Well, one of the things interesting about that time was that they did not, apparently in the early 80s, have the ability to fine Cotter for license violations. The only thing they could do was pull the license. Did they ever do that? Not to my knowledge. They just threatened to do that. So we had a situation where we literally, at one point, we even requested that the governor ask the legislature to change the law. I have a letter here in December of 1981 to me from the governor of Colorado, Governor Richard Lamb, saying that they will consider placing this item on the 1982 governor's call to grant the Department of Health the authority to fine radioactive materials handlers for violations. So I don't know exactly when that happened, but at some point that law did change and it enabled the regulators to do that. I should mention too, another thing that was going on at that time was that Cotter Corporation was very actively working to defend itself, and they would take out ads in newspapers like this one in October of 1980, talking about all the work they were doing to clean up whatever was wrong at the site. So there was a lot of PR occurring and trying to defend themselves with the public in the middle of all of the mess that we were dealing with. What was happening in the late 70s and early 80s regarding potential health impacts to the area residents? Not much. We had asked about cancer data for Fremont County and learned that the Colorado Central Cancer Registry could not track in any meaningful way cancer incidence as compared to length of time living near the mill site or possible exposure to carcinogens by drinking contaminated well water. What has always been needed and requested was a comprehensive epidemiological study, a longitudinal study that would follow people over time, but that has never been granted to this community. We were also concerned about Cotter Mill employees' health, those who were most closely exposed to this radioactive material, but public access to information about potential problems was limited. I remember learning there was a national registry for uranium industry workers called the United States Uranium Registry. I wrote to them asking what kind of information they tracked for uranium workers. They wrote back on stationery that said they were the Uranium Registry, but unfortunately in the letter that they wrote back to me it said, at this time, and this is April of '81, at this time we have no funding to compile a record of all current and former workers in the industry. Further, we have no funding at this time to do any study of mill workers. So even though they had stationery, they didn't apparently do what they were founded to do. There were some studies done over the years regarding workers. There was one in 1981 from NIOSH, or the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, that showed that workers who worked in the old alkali leach mill and were exposed to yellow cake and other materials did have a higher incidence of kidney injury from exposure, but overall there's been very little attention to possible health risks for employees. So that's a small sample of what was going on at a very turbulent time regarding the mill site. And as you've seen, many of the same issues are still problems today. I'll turn it over to Carol Dunn now to talk about some of her experiences related to the Cotter Mill.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to see such a good turnout for our program today. I have to correct Lisa a little bit. It says I was a resident of Lincoln Park for 45 years. Well, there were days when it felt like I was a resident because you spend 10, 12 hours a day at Hilltop Market. You feel like you live there. But we became friends with our customers, and therefore we became neighbors. And that was our community up there in Lincoln Park and the surrounding area. Ray and I got married in 1968, and by 1972 we had bought Hilltop Market. But we live at 380 Barrett. Take that down so you can haunt me. Come get me. By the Ford garage. And we'd go out in the yard and play with the baby, who is now in his 50s too, and to have this smell, this horrible smell, the alkaline mill, clear over there, across the river, quite far north of in town. And at Ray's folks' place in Lincoln Park, it was even worse, and they got the dust. When the wind started blowing, you could hardly see. You couldn't see the mountains, and you couldn't hardly see to the end of the street. So we knew there was something going on up there, that there was a mill and people worked there and that sort of thing, but didn't really pay too much attention. During the construction of the impoundments in the late 70s, early 80s, the little neighborhood store served as a little neighborhood bank as well, and we would cash the checks for the workers. Friday night, there'd be a bunch of guys, many sometimes, and sometimes just a few, come into the back room at Hilltop, into my little office, which wasn't much bigger than this platform at the time, and crowd in there, and I would take their checks and give them their money and go on their way. This went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, these guys coming in with the dirt all over their coveralls and their boots and their skin. And, you just don't think about these things particularly affecting you. It's just working guys with dirt. Okay, that's great. They had a job. And then when the Superfund site was declared in 1984, Lynn and Dion Boughton, Jeri's folks and our good neighbors in South Canyon, introduced us to the Superfund issues. And at the time, one of our big concerns was property values, because you didn't quite understand what the Superfund sign meant, that all the properties are condemned, or, it was early days, and we didn't understand that. But I joined LPAC, Lincoln Park Area Concerned Citizens, and helped with fundraising projects, tag grants. We had many meetings with people and kept learning more and more about the Superfund process and what was going on at Cotter and how it was affecting Lincoln Park. One of the things that Emily found in her archives, that I'm just going to read a little bit of it, it won't take too long. On October 3rd, 1988, members of an LPAC panel met with St. Thomas More Hospital Hospice Administration. Vital statistics, which are public information, indicate that since 1983, there have been 180 cancer-related deaths at the hospice. 57 of those deaths occurred to residents from Lincoln Park community. This would indicate that 26% of Fremont County cancer-related deaths occurred in Lincoln Park. According to the 1980 census, there were 32,511 residents within the county of Fremont. We estimate there to be 3,500 residents in Lincoln Park. That would indicate that 9% of Fremont County residential population resides within the Lincoln Park community, balanced against the 26% of cancer-related deaths. So that got all of our attention, and especially Lynn, being a scientist and a chemist and knowing what uranium and other heavy metals can do to the human body, said, we aren't going to get any results unless we bring a lawsuit. So in 1988-89, we got a lawyer and we started signing, getting people to join the lawsuit, which was like 560 some, I believe, at the end of the day. And I remember hearing all these stories, because I was a notary public at the time, and people would come in and do releases and depositions and whatnot. And I would, they'd tell me their stories, because I'm their neighbor, and we're all in this together. So that was really an eye-opener, as well as a 1989 August breast cancer diagnosis at the age of 42. There were two other women in close, good acquaintances and good friends that were diagnosed in the same month. And, they were older than me, 42, But guess what? Science works, medicine works, I'm still here, Yay! Thanks. And, but that was just really an awakening a little bit, but has solidified my interest in the health effects and my determination to stay involved in my community. When Cotter was trying to bring the Maywood soils in 2002, I joined CCAT right away. We did the legislation that Emily spoke of. We did fundraising, we did comments on different reports and documents that were generated by Cotter and by the health department, and a little bit by EPA. They weren't so much involved back in the day. But then when the CAG was formed, when the EPA formed the CAG as part of the Superfund process, I joined that too, and been doing the same kinds of things as far as comments to right now, and I've just come to find out that this is something that has to be tracked, it has to be looked at, it has to be looked at in the long term and over the generations. We're getting old. So part of this outreach that we're doing here is try to get younger people interested. So if you've got younger relatives that have any scientific interest in what's going on, we need that younger generation to carry this forward. And I also got to thinking about the damages that have happened to people in the Lincoln Park area. The fear of the unknown, as we all, as human beings know, is the worst. There's no end in sight. We don't know what's going to happen. We have fear of loss of property values still, even though things are booming, and nobody tells anybody that buys something in Lincoln Park unless they go after the information. They don't know that it's within a Superfund site. And the real loss of their water, the use of their water. These people, you know, had wells, and now they can't use them anymore. Of course, a lot of them have the wee stitch, but still, it's just that loss of your property values and the fact you've got this water at your feet. So my reason for living, I guess, at least today, is so that your stories, if you've lived in Lincoln Park, if you have stories to tell, are not forgotten. I'm giving Lisa a plug because she does oral history. She can arrange for oral history to be taken and filed with the rest of the pile of information. So thanks for letting me tell my story, and someday I hope to hear yours if you have one. Thanks.
Well, I too thank you for your restless learnership here to try and figure out what's going on at your community. How many of you have had any dealings with Cotter, any piece of the story at all? Okay. All right. And how many of you have never heard of it before? Okay. So one of the things that, again, my name is Jeri Fry, and I, along with Sharon Cunningham, were the original co-chairs for Colorado Citizens Against Toxic Waste. When Cotter could not make a good profit like they wished to by making yellow cake, they began to shop around for other ways to make money. And they began to haul in homeless waste, is what they called it, because they'd be paid to take that in. And so their business model shifted, and the work that my dad did, a little background there, he and his lab crews worked in Grand Junction at National Lead. And that company, the work that they were doing shut down, and then he was recruited by Dave Marcotte, who was the one of the three people that started Cotter Corporation. And because National Lead had shut down, those people had lost their jobs and were willing to be moved to a new site. So 11 families moved across the Continental Divide and landed here in Canyon City to help start Cotter Corporation. That was in 1958. I was 2 years old. And as the years went by, I realized that, and many of you have probably heard me say this, the sugar in my pantry said C12H22O11 because that's the chemical description of sugar. So my father was definitely a chemist, and none of that rubbed off on me. So, but I do know some of the things that he was saying, even when I was little and didn't really care or pay attention. They protected us from it quite a lot. But as I got older, I began to kind of follow what was going on. And then I got married in 1973, in the early 80s. I was having kids and family. And in 1984 is when this site was declared a Superfund site. The year ahead of that was when my father came forward and blew the whistle at the site. And he had been trying to work within the corporation to correct things for many years. when he took that action in 1983, somebody came into his house, destroyed his library and all the furnishings. So we don't know the exact connection, but the timing was incredible. At any rate, years went by, things were quiet for some time, and I think our community thought that everything was fine out at Cotter. And then all of a sudden, in 2002, Cotter announced in the Gazette Telegraph in Colorado Springs that they were going to bring in waste from Maywood, New Jersey. They had bid on it because it was going to be an incredible revenue stream for them. And many citizens in Canyon City caught wind of this. And I remember a local attorney came to see me when I was working at the county clerk's office and said, "Did you see this article in the paper? I know that your family's been involved in this. You need to know this is happening." So sure enough, it was Cotter wanting to bring in the waste from Maywood, New Jersey. So the community rose up and we established Colorado Citizens Against Toxic Waste in 2002 as a 501c3 nonprofit, and now we're also a registered charity. We organized in response to what Cotter was trying to do, and we actually went up and talked with Governor Owens and asked for a 6-month moratorium on their decision to let that happen. And because he granted that, then we were able to begin the research necessary to determine what this would mean to our community. If, for example, Maywood had come in by rail car, it would have split our town in half, just the sheer quantity of train cars going through. So there were many aspects and consequences if this had happened. So some of the legislation that CCAT was supporting was the first one in 2002 actually revised the Radiation Control Act, and it provided our county commissioners here with $50,000 to hire independent experts to assess the situation. It also required deadlines on the timely renewal so that you couldn't just continue. Cotter was functioning well past their license, and a total of 7 years beyond when they should have been renewed. And the answer back to the community was that it was simply timely renewal. So it just floated. And this put an end to that. They did socioeconomic impact studies. They did notification of well owners of the contaminated wells, and a requirement that all these things be considered during the licensing process that was coming up. So this is the sausage that gets made behind what our group of citizens was trying to do to protect our community. And that, what I read to you, those 7 pieces, that was just the first piece of legislation, and there were 3 others. You'll see in the exhibit over here off to the side, there's a pedestal with with a news tabloid that has been laminated. That is the original Cotter files that was done by the Canyon City Daily Record back in the day when we had newspapers. I never thought I'd say that. Because we don't now. We don't have that same kind of coverage. CCAT had to establish what is called party status. That's a thing. If you want to be part of a legislative action, you have to establish yourself as party. And so we had to establish ourselves in order that we could become part of the discussion even more regarding the Maywood application. So this threat of importing Maywood material, which was 470,000 tons of radioactive material from a Superfund site in Maywood, that threat continued for 8 years. It was in 2008 when Cotter finally said, "Okay, we're not doing it." And so that dropped. By 2009, CCAT had hosted 40 public meetings. And then the license hearing came in 2005. And we had our co-chair, the other co-chair, Sharon Cunningham, was the most ravenous researcher I have ever met. And after 21 years, she has stepped down, so she is not actively out in the public anymore. The other thing that CCAT did was to win a grant from the EPA, and that was a $50,000, it's called a TAG grant, Technical Advisor Grant, and that was where we hired specialists to come in and interpret the administrative record from the state so that you and I can read it and it makes any sense to us. Those 2 volumes are here at the museum, and you can come by and talk with Lisa and check them out and read them in the reading room. That brought us kind of up to date to, on the administrative record, to the early 2000s. We won an award from the Sierra Club chapter for outstanding community service. CCAT also won the EPA's National Award in 2004 for excellent in community involvement, and that's right there. I had to bring it in because it's dear to my heart. The Community Advisory Group is a construct of the EPA, and CCAT was able to facilitate bringing that process into the community so that you and anyone else in the community can attend and learn from the whole process, which involves the EPA, the community, the Department of Public Health and Environment at this point, and the potentially responsible party, which at this point is, who is that? It's Cotter, and they're back at the site. That's a whole nother deep conversation. How many of you knew that Cotter was back at the site? Okay. In 2004 and 5, the EPA told us that, if you've got issues about health in your community, then you need to go do a grassroots survey. We are all volunteers on the CCAT board. Nonetheless, we took the challenge and we did a survey that took us 2004 and 2005. And the results of that survey were shared with the Medical Association here at Fremont County, who sent it up to the Medical Association at the state of Colorado, and they took it to the CDC that bounced it on over to the ATSDR. And 10 years after we completed our survey, ATSDR published their findings. So it's like making sausage, I said. Okay, I better stop that. They make
Don't insult the sausage. We make really good sausage at Hilltop.
Yeah, Hilltop Market made good sausage. You can look in the findings of the ATSDR publication, which is a large thing, and it's not as definitive as saying this is what they found. You'll need to read their document. In the ensuing years, we commented on many things formally in the various processes. As a matter of fact, I think there was a total of 60 formal comments produced by Colorado Citizens Against Toxic Waste in every process through the years after the CAG started. I can remember in the early years, you can too, that nothing was on the internet. When we asked for the EPA's documents, how were we going to research them? They're up in Denver, or they're in Washington, or whatever. And so the first thing that friend Sharon Cunningham was able to do was insist that the EPA produce a way for us to do that. We got floppy disks. So that is not that long ago, but you can see how the technology has changed. And so then in 2008, actually, CCAT filed a civil action together with the Rocky Mountain Clean Air requesting the review of EPA's radon standards at the site. Radon is a radioactive gas that can be emitted because of the decay chain of uranium. And we had the largest open-air tailings pond, one of the largest open-air tailings ponds in the area. It was 157 acres. And you can see it in the exhibit. The last thing that we did legislatively was to ask for the Uranium Processing Accountability Act, which meant no uranium processing facility could expand or rebuild until they had cleaned up their mess. Governor Ritter came here to Canyon City to sign that bill into law, and that was in 2010. But then in 2011, they started demolishing Cotter without the involvement of the CAG, which was the community involvement, and without public involvement. So they just started demolishing it. And then CCAT had actually gone again and filed a lawsuit. And the judge said that they would not dismiss our request for a judicial review. And that was in 2010. But then in 2011, December, Cotter announced that they would close. That is important because it triggered what is called the CERCLA/Superfund process. And that's when the EPA began to be involved more in earnest. CCAT kept fighting really hard through the community advisory group. And we were asking tough questions, really tough questions. And in 2012, the process through the CAG was put on hold, and they paused that, and there was no more activity until we returned later. So that added to the way this whole thing got more and more protracted. So suffice it to say that for whatever reason, the process that we are trying to get done here, which is the best cleanup of this site for this community, has been so drug out that nobody really realizes that it's not happening. We're not getting cleaned up. And so the best thing that we can do, and one of my biggest motivators personally, is the education of our community so that you understand the dangers, because now we have a man-made radioactive landscape feature. And you know, an ocean is a landscape feature too, and if you know about it, you can live with it safely. But this one you can't see, you can't smell, and it's still creeping through. It's never been cleaned up. So the best thing we can do is educate and learn everything we can. So that's where my energy has gone, and time permitting a little bit later, I'll share with you some ways to interact with your government to get these changes to happen. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Chase Patterson. I'm a documentarian of sorts that covers EPA Superfund sites for a YouTube channel called Keep Curious Co. I recently released a documentary called The Hidden Crisis at Canyon City that covers the history of the Cotter-Lincoln Park Superfund site from its beginnings up until basically October 2023, essentially, is when I had to pull the plug on research and just get it ready to go. And before I kind of dive into the meat and potatoes of this thing, I do want to express how grateful I am, not just to the women up here with me right now, but to every member of the CAG and CCAT that's welcomed me and helped me through to help create this piece to share the comprehensive story of this site. None of it could have been done without them. When I first started looking into this site, I could tell pretty quickly that the situation here varied a lot from other places I've looked into. There aren't many 40-year-old Superfund sites that are in their first phase of cleanup, right? And as an outsider looking in, that's alarming, right? But you also want to get a finger on the pulse of, like, okay, is anybody paying attention to this thing? Like, what's going on? Why are, have 40 years passed and we're in the beginning phases here? And very quickly, I found these guys and was like, okay, cool. They know everything. They'll help me through this. And so we've heard from Emily, from Carol, from Jeri about the history of this site and the lived experience. I'm here as an outsider, and what my job's going to be right now is to dive into what is currently stalling this site out, particularly beginning in 2018 to today, and time permitting, a peek at what the future, very near future, might look like. Time permitting, we'll see. I'll try to get through this. As just sort of a disclaimer, there are a lot of players in this game, a lot of names, a lot of companies, a lot of corporate shuffling. And so I've tried to lay this out in a way that's as clean as possible. If you have questions, either afterwards or even after the entire panel, please come up and I'll be happy to elaborate on any point. So strap in. In 2018, Cotter transferred the land and their radioactive materials license to a company called Colorado Legacy Land. Before today, how many of you guys have heard of the name Colorado Legacy Land? Okay, so a few. And through my film, okay. Well, that's another question. How many people have seen the film? Oh, wow, okay. Well, cool. That feels good. Thank you. And taking ownership of the land, CLL, they assumed all of Cotter's obligations, right? Their legal liability, their regulatory obligations, and all of that on Cotter's behalf. Just like Cotter, CLL was now the responsible party when it came to continuing the remediation process while keeping the site in compliance with the radioactive materials license with the state of Colorado. The transaction between Cotter and Colorado Legacy Land was a very complex one. Even in their own public statement, they said this was an incredibly complex transaction, but they failed to mention how much money was involved. Nobody knows that except them at this stage. All that's publicly known is that Cotter paid CLL to take the site, its liabilities, and its obligations off their hands, off their books, and what's not publicly known is how much they paid CLL and where some of that money went. But the history of Colorado Legacy Land, when you kind of take a step back, is very curious. They don't have a history at all. They were formed for the sole purpose, and this is their public statement, to absorb 2 Cotter contamination sites. The Cotter Lincoln Park Superfund being one, and the Schwarzwälder uranium mine just northwest of Golden, Colorado. That's a story for another day. I would recommend looking into that one too. There's a very active story with that one as well. Colorado Legacy Land was created by 2 different companies. There was a company called Legacy Land Stewardship and a company called Alexco Environmental Group. And remember that name, Alexco Environmental Group. But what would inspire somebody to create a company purely to swoop in and take over contaminated land that not only carries with it massive ongoing liabilities, but is constantly subjected to significant state and federal regulatory scrutiny? And money, well, yeah, we're getting there. So to best understand how this deal happened and take a guess at why, we kind of need to understand what these two underlying companies, Legacy Land Stewardship and Alexco Environmental Group, claim to do. Very briefly, Legacy Land Stewardship is a real estate company that specializes in secure divestment solutions to owners of surplus, environmentally impacted real estate that responsibly and permanently delivers sustainable, long-term environmental stewardship and seeks eco-friendly reuses for public benefit. They're classified as a public benefit corporation, which means that they are not beholden purely to shareholders, that they can, as one of their founders, Paul Newman, put it, behave altruistically to secure a better, I forget the exact wording, but essentially a better reputation with the community. They've marketed themselves as the perfect solution for companies that own toxic land that has no redevelopment value, which sounds familiar, right? That is held merely to control future reuse and or manage liability risk. So that's Legacy Land Stewardship, right? That's one of the partners. Alexco Environmental Group is now known as Insero Solutions as of 2020, is an environmental consulting and remediation business that essentially specializes in cleaning up environmental contamination, from any type of site, Superfund sites, brownfields. They specialize in environmental assessments, permitting, restoration services, site operations, any labor and site administration surrounding environmental cleanup projects, basically. At the top of Insero Solutions is its CEO, a man named Jim Harrington. And in 2020, Jim Harrington, along with other management at Alexco Environmental Group, purchased that company out from under their parent company, a separate company called Alexco Resource Group, and then renamed themselves to Insero Solutions. But this is where things start to get a little weird. So Insero Solutions was contracted by Colorado Legacy Land, a company that Insero, previously known as Alexco Environmental Group, partially owns. And they were hired to carry out the actual physical work on the site. But the man whose job it was to manage those contracts with Colorado Legacy Land, and the man that ran and continues to run the company that receives them, are the same man, Jim Harrington. Jim Harrington is, or was, on both sides of the same transaction, being the managing director of CLL and the CEO of Insero. So for 5 years, from 2018 to 2023, CLL paid Insero to carry out work on the site, and the average cost just to maintain the site monthly is roughly $150,000. That doesn't include regulatory costs or any additional work required to fix up the numerous toxic waste leaks that have occurred over the years. But in February 2023, everything changed. Harrington declared CLL insolvent, claiming that they were unable to fulfill their obligations under CERCLA, and by the end of March, they had completely pulled out of all on-site operations. Colorado Legacy Land, the company that had promised to be the permanent, responsible, sustainable solution for the cleanup at the Cotter Superfund site, had proven to be literally none of those. And they just essentially walked away, or as Jeri put it at one point, dropped the keys in the parking lot, and I love that one. In the months leading up to CLL's insolvency, Jim Harrington claimed that he no longer had any relationship with the owners of Legacy Land Stewardship, which is the company that Insero shared ownership of Colorado legacy land with, implying he's effectively the last man standing. And not take the man at his word, but in looking this up, from what I can tell, the last other man to have left legacy land stewardship left in 2021. So it's been just Jim Harrington on the other side of that transaction for the 2 years leading up to CLL's insolvency. And legacy land stewardship, as far as I can tell, has completely disappeared off the map. You can go to their website. It takes about 2 minutes to load for some reason, but you can get there. It's important also to be perfectly clear here that nobody is accusing CLL and Cerro or even Jim Harrington himself of any specific wrongdoing, criminal or otherwise. The situation appears suspicious, right? That suspicion can be calmed with even a moderate amount of transparency into the true nature of the relationship between somebody who managed the contracts on one side and somebody who cashed the checks on the other, being the same person. And Harrington has not provided that transparency. I reached out to Jim Harrington directly. For those of you who have seen the video, you know that the last third is about this topic. I did not set out to do that. I intentionally set out not to do that. I reached out to them to attempt to answer these questions, right? Oftentimes, bad optics or suspicious circumstances are a result of just poor optics and lack of information. So I really tried to shine a light on this for everybody's sake, for the community's sake, and Cerro's sake, Harrington's sake, and my own sake. Unfortunately, it seems as though there are some things that they do not want the light shining on, and that continues to this day, literally to about 8 o'clock last night, which we'll get into in a minute too. Harrington did respond to me, ultimately stopped responding to me altogether. So the limited transparency into the nature of the relationship between Colorado Legacy Land and their contractor / part owner in Cerro, and the handling of the money that CLL received from Cotter to take over the site, prompted some members of the community to escalate the issue and call on the Colorado Attorney General to investigate a potential conflict of interest. And in a monthly meeting, I believe it was June, right? June 2023, Assistant Attorney General Shelley Hickerson joined a CAG meeting to address those concerns. When asked about the link between the two companies, Hickerson claimed repeatedly that there is no corporate link between Cerro and CLL, but in the sometimes same sentence, admitted that she had never heard the name Alexco Environmental Group before. She admitted to having no knowledge of Cerro's corporate history, but was willing to go on record and provide an answer to a question that she did not understand. So the only logical explanation, and I remember a complete outsider here, so I'll say what I want to say, is she's either remaining willfully ignorant or outright lying. At this point, I don't think there's a way that she doesn't know, but she also hasn't made any additional statements since then. I'd like to believe that it's willful ignorance, just helps me sleep better at night, but there's not really a way to know, right? At least not yet. So why does all of this matter at all? Why should we care that there's this corporate shuffling behind the scenes? When you put these pieces together, the pattern makes it appear as though Colorado Legacy Land was created for the sole purpose of absorbing legal liability on behalf of Cerro, one of their founders and owners, and also the people that they pay the money to maintain the site. In this scenario, CLL existed purely to act as a filter, allowing money to pass through CLL to Cerro, while CLL captured the legal liability and regulatory risk on their behalf. Cerro's not exposed to citations, fines, concerns with regulators, but they just put this other company, Colorado Legacy Land, in the middle of it to absorb all of those issues. And absorb it they did. When they declared insolvency, they were in violation of their radioactive materials license. They remain, to this day, in violation of their radioactive materials license. It has been 13 months, and the state has not, at least from what they have told us, taken a single step forward in enforcing that. So this is all an observation. This is not an accusation of any specific wrongdoing. We're putting pieces together of the behaviors of certain companies that have involved themselves in this site since 2018 and continue to involve themselves after their main company decides to dip out and runs out of money. Going forward, Cotter is being forced back to the site to fulfill their obligations under the CERCLA Superfund process and finish the remediation. They've already brought in an environmental consultant to handle that process for them, which is to be expected. It's a man named Toby Wright for seemingly a one-man operation for Wright Environmental Services. And while some additional contractors have been hired for the administrative and planning side of things, there's not yet been an announcement of who will take over the physical on-site contracting work. Basically, who will take Incero's place. Incero's interim contract with the state of Colorado expires at the end of April. 30 days from today, 31 days from today? So at some point, we will all get news of what contractor Cotter has chosen to award a contract to on the site, and it could very well continue to be Incero. We should find that out within the next month. I'd love to wrap this up real neatly and stick a bow on it, but I think as some of your faces are telling me you understand, this story is far from over. This is a very active, ongoing process behind the scenes, and one that, quite frankly, does not bode well for the future of the cleanup of this site. But that said, I hope this has provided some insight behind the scenes into how the site was effectively abandoned for the better part of a year, and possibly a little bit of what to expect in the next month or so going forward. Thank you.
We will now entertain any questions you may have, but for the purpose of the recording, I will also repeat the question to the panelists. So, have any questions?
I've got about 5 minutes worth here. Can I go?
Did you want to come up and talk?
There's more than one question. Is that allowed?
Yeah, that's yes, that's allowed.
First, I'd like to thank the panel for all your time and decades of work on this item. So, thank you. And my first question to Chase is, you said this is not maybe the oldest Superfund site. There are Superfund sites that have taken more than 40 years to get cleaned up.
So the Superfund process, sites began to be added to the national priority list in like late 1983, 1984. So they would all be hitting about 40 years right now. This is the only one that I'm aware of that is in the first phase of cleanup.
So the United States government has been dragging its feet
Yeah.
for 40 years. And I mean, they don't move very quick to begin with, but they picked on Canyon City now and allowed all this poison to fly through the air and underground for 40 years, which is unusual even for the government.
So Colorado is in a unique position. Colorado is what's called an agreement state. There's an agreement with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that cedes regulatory authority of radioactive materials to the state. That's why the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment is closely involved in the cleanup of this site and is sort of the primary
So,
contact.
The US government, the state is
Yeah.
doing this to us.
Yeah.
Our elected officials are doing this to us.
Essentially, the turnover of them as well. Yeah.
Could I add a quick comment to that? Just to be clear, one of the things that prolonged this to a 40-year site is, as I briefly mentioned earlier, the site was never forced to close down. So all through the 80s, 90s, into the early 2000s, Cotter Corporation was allowed to continue milling uranium and throwing things in the impoundments. And so, you know, yes, it should have been shut down and cleaned up years ago, but it was not, and it's important to understand that that's part of it.
Yeah.
And one of the things about that too is that they didn't have to clean it up while they were actively producing. And as they begin to discover contamination outside their particular area, the original boundaries, they just bought it up because it was cheaper to buy it up than clean it up.
It's my understanding that some of the material on that site was shipped in from White Sands, so the U.S. government owns some of the material that they have covered. Is that correct?
I can answer that to this extent. I can't speak specifically to White Sands, but the Manhattan Project materials were brought in to this site and disposed in the ponds. All of
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Highly radioactive.
So the United States government owns radioactive material that's shipped here, and so part of the ownership of the radioactive materials at that site is the United States government.
It's,
Cotter bought the.
yeah, technically Cotter bought the waste from the Manhattan Project that they bought. And and brought that in because nobody wanted it.
Okay, I can understand that reason. I just, from a lay perspective, I would view that as the United States government's junk that they've dumped in Kansas City. Someone may have bought it, they started it. And the reason I'm asking that question is Superfund legislation, as I understand it, says that if you contribute one thimble full of hazardous material to a Superfund site because of joint and several liability, which is a legal term, you have the obligation to pay for cleaning it all up, because the other parties can't. So I'm sitting here listening, just wondering why it is the United States government hasn't ponied up and said, we'll pay for it. Because I think what's slowing us down for 4 years, being new to Kansas City, is money. The government does not want to pay for the cleanup and all of the health damages that I'm sure can be proven, and the loss of property values. And when you said that you formed or you taken legal action in 1988 against somebody, suing somebody, I'm wondering, has anybody ever tried to bring a lawsuit against the United States government?
There's so much we could say. Great
Oh,
questions.
gosh, yeah.
Go ahead, Jerry, and then I wanted
No,
to add
I
something
was
too.
trying to, what my context and the dates that I have would have to do with things that CCAT in particular did. And so not the federal government. We never took off to sue the federal government because the Department of Health stood between us and the federal government because of the agreement state status. So the work that CCAT did focused on a couple, 2 or 3 lawsuits over the last 22 years against the Department of Health and what was the subpart W one?
Oh, that was EPA.
That one, and EPA,
Yeah.
okay.
So I can understand they're taking responsibility for managing the site. They are not taking responsibility for owning the material of the site.
Yeah.
I think the
This was a
state-
private site.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, so the state can't say that we're shielding the EPA from the ownership of what they've done there. I don't think.
But let me add something to that too, that there are many complications with this site. One of them is that there is still a known entity that is held responsible under the federal law, and that is Cotter Corporation. Some other Superfund sites around the country get cleaned up by the EPA when they can't find a responsible party. So they put federal money into those sites and they clean it up and meet the standards of the EPA. But here we have, and the reason they bring Cotter back in is Cotter is supposed to pay for the cost of cleaning up the mess they made. And so it prolongs it. There's money in one of these recent bills, I think it might have been the bipartisan infrastructure law, that put additional money into the federal Superfund to clean up some of these sites. But our site doesn't qualify because we have this active responsible party that by law is now brought back in. So there's so many complications to this site.
The state government is responsible for keeping this corpse called Cotter alive so that they don't have to pay for this. That's what I'm saying. I went to the meeting with the Abbey several months ago and walked out after 15 minutes because I saw all those state and federal officials up there with the most patronizing attitude toward the community that I've ever seen. I was appalled at the behavior of these people.
And imagine if you've experienced that off and on since the late 70s and early 80s.
Well, and
You've been very polite for many
We
decades.
can't give up. And when I say we, I mean all of us. We deserve to have this cleaned up appropriately, however it needs to happen. There's a number of things we haven't mentioned because of time limitations, but we are actively working with representatives who are staffers with U.S. Senator Michael Bennett's office, staffers with our congressional representative, Brittany Patterson. We're actively working with them, trying to help them understand this is not acceptable to allow this to drag on another year, another 5, 10, 40 years, whatever it is. So we're really trying everything we can think of. I want to mention too, one of the many disadvantages we have now, besides the fact that print journalism is not what it was decades ago, so it's harder to get the word out, try to get an investigative journalist, and I think Sue is in the room, or was it? Well, we bow down to the people who still do this work, but there's not enough. Also, what we don't have that we did have back in the late 70s and early 80s are state legislators. It's very difficult to get them interested in this. We have tried repeatedly, and we have actually met with one of them back in January for about an hour, but haven't been able to get any follow-up. Our local officials, frankly, we don't have much support from the county, from Fremont County government. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, we had county commissioner support. We had city support. I'm kind of the lone wolf with the city, besides Lisa. But I'm a member of the city council, and I try to keep the city up to date on what's happening at this site. But to champion this issue and to go out and say this is not acceptable for this community, it takes the crowds. It takes more than just us and more than Chase. And thank you, Chase, because his video is doing so much to get the word out now about the nature of this site. We can talk, and I sometimes talk way too much, and the words just kind of go, on. But to have a video that we can share with people that really explain the long, sordid, I might say, history of this site has been really helpful. But you're asking great questions, and we've asked many of those too.
Well, my last comment is you spent 44 years of your life just essentially getting nowhere with the government. And I don't hold that any hope you ever will by normal mechanisms. It seems like there has got to be some trial lawyer in America that would like to make $1 billion fee suing the federal government and take them to court. I don't know if
Yeah,
it's possible.
I don't know.
No, it's not possible.
No.
That's
playing by the rules of the government's ever going to get these people.
the money's on the wrong side of this issue, and that's why the
That's a good way
education
to
is
put
so
it.
important. Let me ask you, how many of you have been actively involved, talking with your elected officials, trying to reach out and let them know what you think about things? Maddie?
So I've lived here since '95, and I grew up in Rocky Flats territory, and have had huge numbers of people dying of cancer or suffering like you have. And I guess what I'm looking for is I want to be more active. I can't make it to your monthly meetings because I have a conflict, but I would love to get an email or a letter or whatever as actions come up that I can participate in. Like I do for a lot of the other social justice actions I'm doing.
Yeah.
To contact your legislator about that.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I
exactly.
do have those connections, but
Yeah.
I don't know enough about the subject to know what you are currently doing.
It's not really invigorated right now either. And I just want to say that our elected officials are caught between deep pockets and powerful public voice. And if you're not speaking your powerful public voice, then the deep pockets win. And so it is our responsibility to bring this education not only to ourselves, but spread it through the community. This contamination has not been defined. We don't know how far it has gone. we have reason to believe that it's still impacting people in and around, I'll leave it at Lincoln Park, because we have some specifics that I won't share at this point. But one of the things that CCAT did just recently was to present resolutions to both the Republican and Democratic Party in our community. This is a nonpartisan issue that we're trying to address. And I would let you know that the parties, I have not confirmed whether they passed all 3 resolutions unscathed at the Republican Party, but all of this is moving forward. The Democrats did one modification to the 3, and they're moving forward to the state. These will become parts of the state platform. And so it is important to find out where you can intersect with your government effectively so that you don't spend a lot of energy just railing. So I have here a list of your elected officials at this point in time. Come and get one of these, and then we've already put all of their names and contact information on here. So that's available. CCAT has been asked to do, help me, I have a well, I need to know whether it's contaminated. Help me, I want to know if I should plant a garden this year. And we're not the experts. We are all volunteer. And so what we have done is put together a list here locally. You can go to Colorado State University, CSU Extension, or to our Fremont County Public Health. And so that information is here if you want to find a way to get your own property tested. So that's available. Over there by the door on the way out, there's a pamphlet called QR Codes to Go. And that is something that you can pick up, and inside are a bunch of QR codes that talk about the different things that you'll see if you go there. It'll help you navigate some of the information that's out there. Pick up one of those and go. I also have this little pamphlet here, and on the front of this is a QR code that tells you how to attend the CAG meetings. So, and you're welcome to get this as quantities last. These are $1 a piece to print. Okay, and we're all volunteers, so just to know. The other thing is that there are points at which you can intersect with the government, and you can say, okay, when is the review of the permit? When is the review of the site by the NRC, the federal government? Because when those moments happen, you can speak. You can do this online. It's a whole hell of a lot easier than it was back when we started in 2002. So we have come a long way. And, you know, we are the government. So we need to take our role seriously and quit fighting with the government and blaming the government, because we live in a democracy. So it's very important that we understand and formulate our questions and formulate our information in a way that helps our elected officials to do a good job for us. And that's on us. So if you have something you want to say, write it out. And then I think it was Mark Twain said that if I'd had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. So take a little bit of time to review your own material before you go railing against somebody, and that way you'll be effective in doing that. We don't teach this in our school systems. We don't teach how to engage this way. Social studies, I had social studies. We had, how many of you had social studies in school? Okay, we may have some inkling of how to do this, but how many of you have grandkids that are in school? Do they know how to do this? We owe ourselves to reinvigorate this process so that people can hear. And this is impacting us. This is a real issue here. Radioactive contamination south of town. So learn everything you can about it. Go to Colorado Citizens Against Toxic Waste online. The addresses are in some of the materials. We have a very robust website right now where you can go and learn things. And also at that website is the Cotter files in digital form, so you can do some research and to know, I think Lisa mentioned it, that this is the repository for the administrative record for this site. And if any of you are interested in learning more about that, she'll show you
Yeah.
where it is.
Yeah, if anybody is interested in, after this presentation, of course, to look at all the records where we have them, you're more than welcome to do so. We can show you those. We have time for one more, possibly two more questions. You, right there? Like,
Yeah, again, I'm wondering how we can be pooling resources. I mean, you guys know how much I love you and appreciate all the work you do in all these decades. Thank you. And of course, this is not the only issue going on right now in terms of radioactive waste. And we have this Tallahassee thing coming up. We did have the gold mine thing, which we successfully have at least temporarily blocked. And I'm just wondering, and I gotta look at your website again because I haven't for a couple months, but to know there's gonna be a public hearing on this bill, participate. Because it's really hard for people, especially young people who have to work a job, to keep track of all this stuff.
Right.
And we do present dates and times and all that stuff.
Great.
And we also, I'm sure we give notification to the community about comments and suggest, do like talking points to send the comments in to CDPHE, to EPA, whichever's the entity that's requesting the comments. And believe it or not, that has an impact. We have had an impact over the years, many times on some of these where they go, oh, well, we didn't think of that. So it really does make a difference to do those comments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Andrea?
I would like to make an announcement. I'm also serve on a city council in Emily. Any one of you, if you live in the city or if you don't, we have people from the county who come all the time. Come in and sign up with the city clerk at the beginning of the meeting, and you can have 3 minutes, they time it, to talk about anything you want to. That's all I'm gonna say. If there's a person on council, I'm not mentioning any names, who gives you blowback about it, you need to ask them what their connection to Cotter is.
Oh.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, Chase, have you considered looking into what other sites besides those two? I mean, are they actually, instead of actually cleaning up other sites or working on
Talked about
other
Schwarzwald a little bit.
sites? Or is
Oh,
that
Schwarzwalder?
just,
Are you, so the question is Insero cleaning up other sites essentially? So they're actually Canadian business. They have a U.S.
Yes.
arm, and that's the United States. It's kind of common for remediation companies actually to operate as a foreign company operating in the United States. So they primarily work with water reclamation and mining cleanup in Yukon, essentially. In terms of,
are actually doing other things?
they are doing other things. Yeah, they have other sites. They are, I believe, we're involved in Schwarzwalder mine, the Schwarzwalder uranium mine, also in Golden. I don't know to what extent. That's a whole nother can of worms I have to rip open at some point. This one's tired me out a bit, so I think I'll give it a rest for maybe a week.
God, he's so young.
But they do have other sites. This is not their primary contract. I don't even believe it's near their biggest one.
It may be the only radioactive one, but we don't know that. We'd have to check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to add a little bit to that, the complication at this site, Encero right now is being contracted by the State Department of Public Health and Environment to do on-site security, maintenance, monitoring, the basic, make sure the pump back system continues to work, because sometimes it has problems. They're accessing a bond that CLL had to pay years ago when they took over the site. So the state is accessing that bond money to pay Encero. So that's one thing that's happening at the site. Another whole thing that's happening at the site is the EPA federal piece of it. And it's the federal EPA that brought Cotter back in. So Cotter, I don't think is yet doing active stuff at the site, but they will be soon. How that's all going to be coordinated, we asked that months ago and really didn't get a satisfactory answer. In the meantime, there is this RFP that the state issued saying, well, you know, the contract is going to be up with Encero in April, and we'll issue this RFP and see who gets awarded that contract. Who wants it, first of all? But so we don't know yet. It could continue to be Encero working out there under contract with the state, or not. It could be some other company. But that meshing of these interests gets so complicated, and we're waiting to see. We don't yet know, even though a Cotter, the contractor for Cotter has been attending our monthly meetings since last fall, but we don't yet have a good sense of really what Cotter Corporation, what their approach is going to be. Are they going to fight everything like they did decades ago? Are they going to say, no, we know this is what we need to do, and yeah, just point us where? We don't know yet. So it's
They're
just
kind of a ghost entity too.
right now, yeah.
Cotter Corporation, you'll find them as a wholly owned subsidiary on the website for General Atomics. General Atomics, of course, is the government company that made the stealth bomber. But the truth of the matter is that through all of this work, we've been very much engaged, and we don't even know at present. They're just so ethereal. Cotter is like a name behind which they hide. Cotter is like Cotter can can pay for attorneys to do their dirty work, but there's really nobody here that we've been able to engage with.
To add a little bit to that, even the president of Cotter has scrubbed himself from the internet. His man named Kenneth Mushinsky. Not a single photo of him exists. Even on sites of which he is the director or the president or the CEO of certain companies. He's on boards of other companies. He just recently got onto another board. There is not a single photo of this man. The only trace, and I won't tell you where it is because that's creepy, but I found where he lives in rural Texas. That's it. That's even tax records, anything. Stuff that you can kind of find on anybody, right? This man scrubbed himself from the internet. We don't know why. It could just be a privacy thing, but it costs a lot of money to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want to know how we can be expanding the viewership of your movie, the link and stuff. Is your link for your movie on some of this material that you're
Yes.
I believe so. It's
Absolutely.
on
There's a whole back page on
the QR codes to go.
codes to go with the QR code and.
Yeah, it's on the
Yeah.
back of that.
Yeah.
And just word of mouth, generally. If you got something out of it and feel that you know somebody that would also get something out of it, either in the community or in a similar situation, or just for the sake of understanding how screwed up some of this stuff can really be, then share it. If you think they'll find it boring, then don't worry about it.
They're not-
Next door.
Yeah,
I've had
yeah.
people in my district asking me about it. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, is this true? Because if it is, no one will want to live here. I'm like, right. It's true, and yeah.
So we have worked through the structure of what we have, which is the CDPHE and the EPA. So CCAT has been actively working with the raggedy government structure that we've got And just, you've got to keep this topic alive. Otherwise, you're setting up the future for failure and putting your next generations in harm's way. We need answers to this. We need cleanup to begin to happen. But there are places that you can engage immediately, and that's with the CAG. Every month we meet. Grab one of these if you're interested in getting in with the CAG, because the QR code here will take you there. If you are interested in joining CCAT, contact us. CCAT is the entity that does an enormous amount of research behind the scenes and tries to drive activism to inform the community so you know when to go and talk to the legislators or testify at the legislature or go and talk to your county commissioners or what's going on in Tallahassee Creek. You know, inject yourself there. Don't just, don't wait. We'll leave it at that.
Thank you all for coming. If you want to have any more, or you have any more questions, our panelists will be available afterwards. And again, we will be putting this video of the panel presentation on our YouTube channel and channel 191. And of course, if you want a digital copy of it, please ask staff. Thank you. It's Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center. Thank you so much for coming.
Big shout out to Lisa for hosting us.
Yeah.
And helping us.